Well, hi there. This is Scott Duffy from GetCloudSkills.com. And in today's video, we're going to go through the process of creating a Windows virtual machine in Azure. We're going to go through it step by step, slowly, so that you can learn how to create a virtual machine in 2021. If you wouldn't mind, I would really appreciate it if you would smash the like button on the video. And if you're interested in content such as this, hit the subscribe button as well. And I will try to create videos like this over time so that you'll be able to learn Azure for free on YouTube. How awesome is that? So we're going to start by logging into the Azure portal. Now, if you don't have an Azure account, you can get one for free. It's azure.microsoft.com/free. And you can get 30 days of credits for $200 and also 12 months of free services, including a Windows and a Linux virtual machine for free for 12 months. If you do have an account, please log into your account and we're going to go into the portal. Now I'm at the dashboard view. There's also the home view here, and you'll see there's the big create a resource button on the home view. There's also a create a resource button on the menu. Now the Windows virtual machine is the #1 item offered in the home screen for this marketplace. And so I'm just going to choose the Windows Server 2019. Now there is a wizard interface. You can see here there are 7 tabs or 6 tabs plus a review tab. And like I said, in this video, our whole purpose is to go through this basically field by field until we get a virtual machine running and we can log in and see that it worked. Now, all resources in Azure have to be tied to a subscription because the subscription is the basics of billing. This is either you have a free account or you, like me, you have a pay-as-you-go account or you have a corporate account. There's many different types of accounts. I'm running this in my pay-as-you-go account. Now, most resources in Azure are organized into resource groups. Now, you can choose from any of your existing resource groups if you have them, or you can create a new one. One of the benefits of creating a new one is it makes it very easy to delete all of the resources once you're done with this project. So I'm going to call this new VM. Now, we're going to get into the details of the Windows virtual machine. We do have to give the machine a name. Now this name is symbolic. In Windows it's going to be the machine name. Because we're not joining this to a domain, it's not going to be used for anything other than basically display purposes. This is probably something where you're just going to give it a unique name so that you would recognize what is supposed to be running on this machine. Now you can see the green check mark here saying that my name here has clearly passed the validation. Now, Microsoft Azure has over 60 regions of the world where you can run computers such as virtual machines and Azure services. Now, the truth is you don't actually have access to all 60 because some of those regions are government regions, military regions, and you have to have special sign-ups such as the Chinese regions. So in effect, you've got 20 or 30 choices. And some of the more popular ones are the East US regions, West US regions. Really what you want to do is create this in a location that was going to be closest to the people and servers that are using this. So I'm going to create this in Canada for my own purposes. Now, one of the benefits of the cloud is the ability to relatively easy create redundancies to your infrastructure. Now, by default, this is going to be a standalone virtual machine. That means there's no redundancy. But if I wanted to create this as part of a number of virtual machines that are going to all host the same workload, use what's called a load balancer in front of it, then I might want to put this into an availability set. The availability set tells Azure that you want these machines to be independent of each other so that if any power supply fails or any rack was to particular fail, any hardware failure, they would be insulated from each other and they wouldn't all go down together. So the availability set tells them that they are to be physically separated within the data center. The availability zone takes that a step further and tells Azure you want these machines to be physically separated among buildings. And so these availability zones are data centers in the same region. In case of like Canada Central, there are a minimum of 3 availability zones. And so if I choose this, I do get to choose which of the 3 availability zones to place this machine in. Then when I create other machines that are related to it, I can put them in other availability zones. In this case, I don't need redundancy. Now we chose Windows Server 2019 as our image, but I do have a choice of other images such as Linux and Windows 2016, Windows 2012, etc., even Windows 10. I'm going to leave it as 2019. It's just a demonstration. The context of a spot image is basically that you can get a virtual machine at a last minute discount. It's just like when you're traveling, you want to go on vacation this weekend, and you go on the travel website and there's a bunch of things on sale. That's because the travel companies know they have this inventory that they want to get rid of, and it's better to get some price for it than for it to be at a loss. And the same concept with spot instances, where Microsoft has some capacity and it's being unused right now. And so if I sign up for a spot instance, I can basically get my virtual machine at a discount. But as soon as a full paying customer comes along, I can get evicted. Right? So essentially, it'd be like if your vacation, you bought it at a discount, but then if somebody later came and wanted to pay full price, they would kick you out of the resort. So maybe the analogy breaks right there. Anyways, the spot instance, we're not going to worry about that. But if you did need to save money, then this is how you would do it. The biggest decision you have up to this point is going to be on what size server to get. Now, fortunately, you can change your mind later. It's relatively easy to upgrade servers to bigger servers or downgrade them to smaller servers once you've created it. So you can see here I'm giving some options of choices that I've recently made, DS1 and B2MS being a couple of my more popular options. But I can see all sizes, and there's a relatively robust 300 choices. So you don't get to choose exactly how much memory, exactly how much disk, exactly how many CPUs, but there's so many choices that you can basically filter it down. So let's say you know that this is going to be a database server and you want it to have 8 CPUs. Well, then you can see here that you're going to be offered a bunch of series. Unfortunately, you have to open the accordion here to see all of the options. But we can see that there's a D8 series, which has 8 CPUs, 32 gigabytes of RAM, 16 options for additional disks, temporary storage, which is the C drive, and that is the price, $758 a month for an 8 CPU quote-unquote database server. Now, we're not going to need a database server for this demo. I'm actually going to go back to, no, I'll pick the D2S, a 2 CPU server, just fast enough for the demo. It is $180 a month, which is roughly $6 a day. So I should remember to shut this down. In the Azure Virtual Machine space, when you do shut them down, you do stop paying for the CPUs and server itself. You still pay for storage, but you don't pay this $189 a month when you stop the machine. Now, Windows servers do need Windows user IDs and passwords, and so I'm going to fill out my user ID and password here. All right. Now, this is a security question as to whether you want to allow traffic from outside of Azure, which is the internet, to be able to access this. Now, in the case of this demo, I do want to be able to use Windows Remote Desktop Protocol, or RDP, to access this server, and it's selected by default. When I'm using this in a production case, I'll probably turn off RDP access and use something like a Bastion server in order to access this for administration purposes. But for the purposes of this demo, we're going to use RDP. Now, I could also enable web access. So if I want to turn this into a web server, I would open up the ports for web. Obviously, in a Linux context, SSH is the equivalent to RDP for Linux, which is port 22. If you already have an enterprise agreement with Microsoft and you already have a set number of Windows licenses, Windows Server licenses, there's a thing called hybrid benefit. And if you confirm that you are qualified for hybrid benefit, then you're able to get this server at a greatly reduced price. You see it went from $189 to $103 just by taking an existing Windows license with me. Now, of course, you have to then later prove, if asked, that this license is yours already. But if you do want to save money, bringing in your existing licenses is one way of saving money. All right. Next, we're going to talk about data disks. Now, remember, when we signed up for the D2S server, which I'll go back into here, it does come with up to 4 additional data disks. This could be for you storing your data on a D, E, F, G type drive, which is local to this virtual machine. It's not recommended that you store your data on the temporary storage, in this case 16 gigabytes. Not only is it limited, but it's also by definition temporary. And if you needed to destroy this virtual machine and recreate it, you would lose that. So let's go back to disks. Now I could create up to 4 data disks. I'm going to create one just to demonstrate this purpose. So I'm going to use premium disks, which are solid state drives. This means that it is faster, obviously faster, but the maximum size is a little bit less. I could downgrade to the spinning disk, the hard drives. And again, you can, it's recommended for backup, non-critical, infrequent access. So for premium storage is good for things you're going to frequently access. Standard SSD, for things that the disk is not a major thing, I'm going to downgrade to a standard. Now, encryption is given by default. It used to be maybe a few years ago that you had to enable encryption. For now, your data stored on Azure through a virtual machine is encrypted at rest. And so Microsoft Azure manages the key. I could manage my key myself. And there's such a thing called double encryption, where Azure has its own encryption and you have your own encryption, and they're both enabled. That might be overkill. I'm going to leave this with the default. A new feature, new feature is called Ultra Disk, which is an even higher level of performance above premium, obviously more expensive as well. So let's create one additional disk. It gives it a name by default. I'll keep it. Do I want to restore from backup or bring in a storage blob? No, I'm just going to leave it empty. With these data disks, you are paying for reserved storage. And so you're given basically a list of options from as low as 4 gigabytes up to, in this case, 32 gigabytes. And so I can say I don't need a big, huge disk. I can have 500 gigabytes. And you can also choose the speed option. So we're on standard right now, but we are given these options for speed, and the default is 150 megabytes per second. I'm going to leave it with the default. All right, so click OK. So now I've added one additional disk to this machine. So when it starts up, I'll have my C drive, and I'll also have a data drive of 500 gigabytes that I can use. Another benefit of this, of course, is I can use it, detach it, and attach it to another virtual machine. So if you had files that you potentially want to migrate from one server to another at some point, you can do this in a data disk. Managed disk is the standard these days. This is basically allowing us to create these virtual machines without pre-paying for the storage for one thing. And Microsoft is going to manage the performance. We don't have to worry. In the old days with unmanaged disks, you had to say that there was a maximum of 10 or 20 virtual machines on the same storage account. And if you exceeded that, you would have performance problems. Well, with Manage This, you can basically avoid worrying about the operations per second. Microsoft will take care of that. All right. So let's continue. Now, all virtual machines in Azure must exist on a virtual network. So if you think about the infrastructure as a service model, you have your virtual machine, which is analogous to a physical machine in the real world. And now we have a virtual network, which is analogous to the real network with routers and cables. You can attach this to an existing virtual network, or as you see here, if they can't find one, they will create one for you with some defaults. So I'm going to accept the defaults. This will be a virtual network created specifically for this VM, and this machine will be the only device on it. And the basic, we're going to get a public IP address because we do need to connect to this from the internet. We can see one will be created for us. Network security group is a fundamental way of protecting traffic traveling across your networks. And so we already saw that we're blocking inbound ports. This will be managed inside of the network security group in terms of what ports are allowed to come into this network. These rules will be added for us automatically. But this also does deal with traffic traveling between your subnets in terms of having multiple divisions of your network and maybe a front end subnet and a back-end subnet and a database subnet, and you can have all these divisions of your primary VNet and use network security groups to control what types of traffic travel. Remember, in modern security practices, you're going to want to have a zero trust model, which means that you have things are locked down by default, even inside the virtual network. Because if someone takes over your web server, you don't want them to be able to hop over to your database server very easily. All right, so we leave the network security group by default. We'll see these rules in it. For accelerated networking, for certain types of VMs, you can put that on a higher speed, I believe it's NDMA higher speed network. And basically, you're going to get a lot more of speed between servers on the same network. Not really a factor for now. If we had an existing load balancer, we can automatically add this to the backend pool of a load balancer, but we don't have that. All right, now we're into the, we've already gone through 3 tabs. We've only got 3 tabs to go. Remember, if this has been helpful, I do appreciate the likes, and for future video subscribes. Anyways, continuing on, I typically turn off boot diagnostics unless I know that I'm going to need to check these. So obviously, if Windows is starting up and it has a particular problem, you can go and check the boot diagnostics and see what errors are being thrown. But I wouldn't turn that on unless you absolutely knew that you needed that. That's just me. The operating system guest diagnostics. Now, when you're dealing with monitoring within Azure, a very popular topic when we're in the administration and infrastructure world, you do need to be able to monitor all of your devices from a central location. And so turning this on will install a VM extension that will allow us to connect this the diagnostics into a in this case, a storage account. And so we can then turn into being able to go and run reports against this or download this for later. The CPU usage, the memory usage, performance stats outside of the operating system itself. We can run this in a managed identity. Well, we've provided a Windows ID and password, and right now we're not using a role-based access control to for this machine to be able to access other services, so we're not going to leave that turn on. Also, we did provide an administrator password, but we could use Azure Active Directory for our administration, which would nullify the Windows administration password, but let's leave that turned off as well. This is a relatively new feature in terms of allowing Azure AD users to log into this VM using single sign-on effectively. Now, I mentioned that these virtual machines are costing around $6 a day in this one that I've chosen. I'm going to want this to turn off by itself because if I forget, if I walk away from this and I forget, I'm going to turn this off at 11 a.m. It is 10 a.m. right now. So at 11 a.m. I want this to shut down by itself if I haven't done it myself. You know, this is not great for a production machine, obviously, but in a development context, you might want to say by midnight, if I've forgotten, shut it down, and then the charges, again, the charges for the CPU stop. I don't need to be notified before shutdown. I could turn on backup right away. You know, in a virtual machine context, keeping backups is important. I won't do that. Azure Site Recovery, or ASR, is a method of basically having this system backed up, ready to be restored in another region in case of disaster, in case the entire region goes down. You can have this. This is great for a production context, for a critical server. This is where backup is more like disaster recovery, manually restored. Site recovery is automated. You can set up a failover. It'll do monitoring, and then if the failure happens, it kicks in. Keeping your operating system updated, obviously important for security, but do you want to allow Azure to run it? Or do you want to have manual updates? That's going to be a business decision. I leave it as automatic for myself. Coming to the last relevant tab is this advanced tab. Now, we already saw that you could enable diagnostics using a virtual machine extension. There are other extensions. For instance, if you need to run scripts, like there's a PowerShell extension, let's open that up. You can see there are different third-party companies that are making extensions available. If you're using Azure DevOps services, there's a pipelines agent which allows you to deploy code directly into a virtual machine. And we can see a network watcher in terms of monitoring traffic to and from the server, etc. Custom scripts I just mentioned. Desired state configuration allows you to set up an automation that will keep the server at the installed state. And so if someone comes along and then changes a security setting, opens up a port, it'll close it back down again when this script runs. So we won't go through each of them, but you could add extensions at this point. And if you do need to pass a script or some kind of configuration, there is so you can select a script to run, and then you can pass in some custom data. So each virtual machine has its own custom data. Maybe this is the machine name or some unique identifier or something like that. This is relatively new. User data. So pass a script, configuration file, or other data that will be accessible to your applications throughout the lifetime of the virtual machine. And so essentially having something that's available not just at startup, but all the time. Interesting. Azure has a feature called dedicated hosts, which allows you to provision a server that only you have access to. So whereas the cloud is more of a shared environment in a normal circumstance, and in this virtual machine that I've chosen to create right now, I'm sharing the physical machine with other customers. The dedicated host allows you to have a machine to yourself. Obviously, this is expensive. There is a stamp fee of at least $1,000 a month for the machine yourself, and then you're paying for each virtual machine that runs on that. And so if you had a dedicated machine, you can deploy this into your dedicated server. Proximity placement is almost the opposite of the availability set, where an availability set tells Azure, I specifically want these things to be a little bit far apart so that if one goes down, it doesn't bring the others down. Proximity placement says I want these things to be close together because there's going to be some communication between the servers, and I need it to be as high speed as possible. Choosing the VM generation, you can see that Gen 1 is the default. What this indicates to me is that there's something in Gen 2 that's not quite ready in terms of there being some advanced features, breaking features, missing features. So we'll leave it as the default unless we know what reason to choose Gen 2. The last tab here is for tags. Tags is a metadata process where you can basically apply custom data to this resource, and then in Azure you can use this for reporting. So I like to say that if you are in a business environment that each project has a billing code, you could say that, well, this machine is going to go under this account within our project management system, within our billing system. Also could say you would identify the individual, myself, Scott Duffy, who's created this virtual machine, so that if something happens and someone else needs to contact me, they know who to do that. Maybe you put your email address in there, something like that. This is all optional, and this is all created by you. You choose the name. These are things I've created in the past and Azure remembers, but I've created these. I've created the values. I can say this is a dev server, etc. So these tags will be attached to the resource. And that's it for going through the wizard. As you can see, it's changed over the years. If you've watched this video from me last year, a couple of years ago, there's some new fields. Things have been moved around a little bit. So I'm looking at 26 cents an hour for this machine. And I've got RDP ports open. These are all my choices. Now, if I did want to do this again, I can download a template or save it to my account, and that way it's repeatable. I can basically automate this virtual machine creation in a script form. I won't do that. I'm going to say create. So I'm going to pause the video, and when we come back, and this should only take a couple of minutes. I mean, I could let it run, but that would be boring. I'm going to pause the video, come back. We're going to have a working virtual machine that we can remote desktop into. Well, we're waiting for that. I do want to mention that if you're interested in Microsoft Azure, but you're just starting from scratch, maybe you have some technology experience or maybe you don't, the Microsoft Azure Fundamentals exam, AZ900, could be a good place to start. Now, I do have a best-selling course on AZ900, over 115,000 students at the time that I'm recording this. And so that would be something that you could find in the link of the description of this video if you're interested in the basics. If you already know the basics and you want to take this type of video forward and learn administration of Microsoft Azure, I do recommend AZ104, which is the Microsoft Azure Administrator exam. Again, I have a best-selling course on that as well with over 100,000 students. And again, the link is in the description. I do keep this course updated every month. I'm recording videos and editing videos on this. And so you're always going to get the most up-to-date information. Now let's go see if the process is completed. All right, the process is complete. Now again, it did only take a few minutes. We can go into the details of the deployment here. We can see the VNet was created. If we look at the virtual machine itself, we can see that it only took 1.5 minutes to provision a virtual machine. What Microsoft does is they have some virtual machines standing by, and it only needs to be configured and rebooted for you to use. And so they're not actually copying an image and starting this whole VM process. Sometimes they have machines standing by for the popular ones. All right, I'm going to say go to resource here. And we can see the details of the machine, D2S, 2 CPUs, virtual machine operating system is Windows. I was created a public IP address. I'm going to copy this because we're going to need to connect to it. All of the tags were created, etc. I'm not going to go through all of the setups here. Again, we can probably, I'll mention, if you're not happy with the sizing of it, it's pretty easy to change the sizing. What you do is you go into the size setting, and you can now downgrade to DS1 or upgrade to DS4 or any other size that you're interested in. All right, let's go back to overview and let's prove that this virtual machine is actually running. We can see here some network life. CPU seems to not have been recorded yet. I'm going to say connect. Now remember, we did set up an RDP port that allowed people to connect. We do have a public IP address, and we know that RDP uses port 3389. I can actually download the RDP file and to my local, and I can use that to connect. So I click on the RDP file. I do have to say connect. Now remember, we gave it a administrator user ID and password, so I do want to use a different account. And I'm going to type in, if I can remember, the user ID and password that I gave the administration account and say OK. Now I do have to accept the certificate. This is a security check. I'll say yes. And now we can see Windows is starting up. Now this is the first time I'm logging in. And so I'm going to go through this setting up your desktop, and it's doing the Windows setup for me. The next time I log in, it'll be quicker. But here we go. We're logging into the VM for the first time. We get that familiar Windows desktop backdrop. This machine here is now the remote machine running inside of the Azure environment. I'm going to say no to allowing this machine to be discoverable. And Windows servers start up by default with this server manager application, which allows you to add a role to it. I'm going to say no to that. So if I wanted to turn this into a web server, I can say add role, and that will install IIS. IIS is not turned on by default. So if I click on add roles, there's a wizard for adding roles, and I'm going to select the server. And what we want is the web server. So we go down here, we can select web server. It says add features. And if we wanted specific versions of .NET Framework, if we wanted other features to be added, SMTP, etc., it's in here. At this point, I'm just going to accept the default IIS settings. We got the web server role. You can see this is web server specific settings. If we need redirection, FTP server, I'll leave the default there. And I'm going to say install. So now this is going to set this machine up as a web server that we can then connect to, because we have the IP address. So we should be able to, from my desktop here, open this web server using a web browser and get the default application view. Now we can check it on the machine itself before we check it over the internet. If you recall, you open up a web browser, it's going to give you a number of messages the first time you use it, but you should be able to say localhost, and you see the default IIS website running on localhost. Now the real question is if we can access the server through the web through this IP address. Now remember, we did open port 80 and the Azure portal, so the traffic will get through. It's just a question of whether the web server will respond on that address. And of course it will. So I enter the IP address into my web browser and I'm brought to this default application. So in this video, we created a brand new virtual machine, Windows 2019 Virtual Machine in Azure. And we were able to remote connect to it, turn it into an IIS web server, and connect to that. Now, that's pretty much it. One thing I mentioned is you create this in its own resource group. It's very easy to delete everything that was just created by saying delete resource group, pasting in the name of the resource group and saying delete. And at that point, all charges will stop, all the storage gets deleted, the IP address gets released, everything gets undone. So that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for checking this out. Again, like button, subscribe, check out some other videos if you're interested. Leave some questions or comments in the comment section, and I'll definitely try to create videos if you've got ideas for videos you want to see, and check out my courses on Udemy. Thank you so much. This has been Scott Duffy from Get Cloud Skills. I hope you have an amazing day.